Hey, so this is SeerNova Podcast, episode 120. We're
What's
back.
up?
We're back after, 2022. We did our whole Comic-Con thing again in November. Back, if you did watch that live or whatever, those 3 days, one of the things I mentioned was the SeerNova TV thing that we were going to start this year. Not doing that actually because found out the pricing for doing that is insane, and I have a house that I have to pay for, so we're not doing that. So it's coming up straight off of that. We're
I
not,
like money.
yeah, money. We have a few focuses that we're focusing on this year. A few major things we are focusing on this year. Um, which we'll get into in our newsletter and stuff. So you should probably sign up, subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about that.
Do we have a link in the description for our newsletter?
We will, yes.
We do now.
Um, Also, we're going to try to make Nova Nation actually be a thing this year. We kind of put it out to the world last year, but now we're actually going to be promoting it, doing all that fancy stuff. As you notice, I don't have a microphone that's half in my face, so you can see my face fully. So now you can be scared completely. Um, I have a little different setup here, so it's a little bit better. This is what I want it to look like. I have two monitors again. It's awesome. Um, we were going to have four projects that were going to be done this year. That's another thing that has changed just in a week time. Um, we're not doing Nightmare at Camp Lovejoy this year, which is the last part of Chronicles of Horror anthology. We are pushing that to next year because we found the three that we really want to focus on and just continue. Inc. 2 is coming out, and that'll be dropping on Kickstarter in March. I'm not saying the date yet because we want to make sure that it's going to be March. Um, uh, then there'll be the Seer Chronicles, which is now going to probably be in the quarter 3 of our company of this year because we're prioritizing things for multiple things. And because Camp Lovejoy isn't going to be in October, we're most likely thinking October for that. And Mittens again will be in July. Will be our like summer blockbuster thing. Um, Mittens will definitely be done by then. So it'll same as last year. It'll be in July at some point, probably mid-July. So we have enough time to ship other things out, the project before, and then get ready for the next one. Yeah. So this whole new setup for our podcast. We're the first couple of minutes we're going to be talking about like things we got going on. That way you don't have to be worried about us talking about that stuff while we have a guest on. Um, we already got a couple of guests coming on through the beginning of this year because I asked, and there's a bunch of people that really wanted March. So you're going to be seeing more than one guest on an episode in March because that was the only way I can do it. So we don't record every week. We're going to be recording 3 weeks in March, but one of them won't come out until April. So there'll be 3 weeks of episodes in April that you can actually watch. That's the only way I could get that done. So everybody could be on that wanted to be on. More than likely, at least one person is going to like bow out before we even get to that. That happened last year. So yeah, in about 10 minutes, our guest will be on around then, and we'll be talking to Phoebe Xavier. She has a bunch of short stories, a collection of them, and we read a couple. Well, Dylan read 2. I read 1. And we're going to be talking about that. She also creates comics. We're going to be talking about all of that as well. So if Dylan has anything he wants to say, that's the time to say.
I was just going to say, no, one thing I'm excited about this year is in order to really start growing Nova Nation, I know that readers want more comics. And so one of our big goals for pushing Nova Nation this year is actually not just the marketing of it, it's going to be specifically trying to get more creators out there on our platform and more of their creations on our platform. So we've set out a pretty ambitious goal of getting up to 500 comics on our site. And the reason that's so ambitious is because we don't just put any comic on our site. We don't let people just upload to our site. You know, they have to submit to us, and we have to approve those comics and the creators for our site. So we want to be able to put some quality stuff out there, and I'm excited to see how this goes. We're going about it in some unique ways, and looking forward to who's going to be joining the platform this year. I know there's some people that Greg has already been speaking with that are interested in joining, and also there are other people that have been reaching out to us to not just join our platform, but to have us be their official publishers. And so that is another big goal that we're setting for early this year. Our goal is to set ourselves up in a manner that we have all the capabilities that would be required to properly publish someone's comics. And so we want it so that, we've got a submission process you can send to us and we can check it out and we can, evaluate and see how we can help you. We'll have a distribution plan so that we can try to get your comic across the internet and into comic book stores. We want to develop a catalog of all the creators, writers, illustrators, letterers, etc., that work with us and that we've connected with over the years, and try to make it so that if, let's say, you're just a storyteller but you need someone to create the whole comic, that we'll have all the capacity to get that done. And so with distribution, creation, and launching of these with marketing and promotions, like we want to have the full frontier of a true publisher, so that we can take someone's vision and bring it to light. So that's definitely something I'm very excited about. We've been having people ask us about publishing for a while now, and essentially the only comics we've published have been either our own comics or anthologies that we've been involved in. So that's something that I think will be very exciting, to start having catalogs of, SeerNova comics that are not just our own, but stuff that we helped bring to light. So that's a big thing. And the interesting thing is, while doing all of that, obviously we're going to be using all of this to distribute and promote our own comics. So we're hoping that you'll start seeing some of our comics in a store near you. So that's definitely something I'm excited to see. Trying to think if there's anything else. Where's that little goal list over here? But oops, shrinking my damn. Oh yeah, that's so. Another thing too is, like, when it comes to getting more guests and getting unique guests, we've been building out some databases of artists and exhibitors. One thing I definitely would like to try to do this year is, Greg, by the way, how long and how far out do we have podcast booked?
It might be May or June.
Yeah, all right, that's perfect.
It might be one episode in June or May. So
yeah, so
as far as they went with.
Yeah, so I'm definitely hoping to start reaching out to some unique people in the industry, whether or not they're creators or artists, but maybe even just people who are in the distribution space or in the printing space, things like that, like people that are in the industry that aren't our typical guests.
Comics Wellspring.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'd love to have Comics Wellsprings on here for an interview to discuss, their product and how they got in the industry. It's interesting because, to see companies that are in the comic book industry that aren't creators, it's like, they probably have similar passions that drove them to that. Maybe they're just not the creative type, in the sense that they're not the best storytellers, but they really love the industry, they love reading it, and now they're part of it. So I'd love to hear those stories. We'd love to get those out there to you, and also expose people to it. Like, not everyone knows about Comics Wellsprings, and we worked with them last year. They actually sponsored our virtual Comic-Con last year. So that's something that we would like to get good companies out there, and just good people out there in the industry, so that people can actually learn more about them and get exposed to them. And I think that that'll be a good thing for the indie community to get a little more connected. I feel like a lot of the indie community, they're like, they're part of one or two Facebook groups. They all share the same Kickstarter every day, and they don't really like connect. And like, that's not what our intention is. Like, we're part of dozens of groups, and we have our own groups. So like, we connect with people all the time, and we're not doing it so we can sell our comic. We're doing it because we want to grow a community. So that's exactly what I hope we can do this year, is continue doing that and bring some of that community we've been connecting with to you guys.
And with that, our guest has arrived. So, hey.
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for having me on.
It's awesome. Greg and I had read a few of your stories, and they're pretty awesome. And one thing that was interesting was I read a couple stories before reading the intro. I just kind of like picked some of the stories to read. And the cool thing was I actually picked one of your oldest ones and one of your newest ones just accidentally. It was Trainwreck and Targeted Adverts, and definitely very interesting, well written stories. So I definitely enjoyed those.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Did you sample any of the horror porn? Did you sample any of the more graphic stuff?
It's funny because I didn't realize that the targeted adverts wouldn't fall under that, but now I'm like intrigued by the other ones. So no, I did not get a chance.
That has like the one brief bit of violence, but the other stories are more drawn out and graphic.
Gotcha. So that's interesting. I'll definitely have to read through more of them later. But no, I also just love the casual nonchalantness of the end. It's like, oh, that's like the new model.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought a little anticlimactic humor after that was what the story called for.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of like the Addams Family, like deadpan. Like it's very like just happens. Like it just happens. You know what I mean? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, super grim, but yes, very matter of fact.
Yeah.
And I read Dinner Time, and
okay,
that was pretty great. I like how he was more focused on like just watching The Simpsons than wanting to do anything else. And
then caring if his sister was safe. Yeah.
Yeah, he just doesn't care about his sister. And then, spoiler, a raccoon attacks him, and it's pretty crazy.
Thank you. I'm glad you guys liked it.
Yeah.
What kind of got you? Because I know you do comics, but what inspired you to do these types of short stories in an anthology like this, rather than potentially like a short comic strip or some other format? Like what inspired you to do it like this?
So I've written short stories since at least for about 22 years, since the turn of the century. And I know I've had older assignments where I had to write them for school. But I do write them for fun. I write them to get the ideas out of my head, that when I come up with an idea for a story, I want to see it through. But as far as putting this together as a collection, I had the idea for a couple of years that, I'm starting to accumulate enough short stories that I could put together an anthology. And then the first month of COVID lockdown in 2020, I was like, all right, if there's any time to do it, this is it. And I initially tried to edit it myself, but I found that was pretty impossible. Like, the stories were already as good as I thought they were going to get. and it really took hiring someone to edit it professionally to get the stories in the shape they're in right now.
No, we definitely know that piece of getting editing done. It's near impossible to write something, review it, and like give it a thorough examination. Like it's the same. Like if you're working on a business, like if you're in the business and then someone just walks in, like, "Hey, why didn't you just do this?" It's like, "Oh, I didn't even see this. I'm so focused on that." So we definitely. We benefit from the fact that Greg writes all of our stories and I'll edit some of them. But then there's other stories we have other editors edit, because it's just like if I'm involved with it, there's only so much. There's only so much I can do to review it, especially working with Greg so frequently. I know where he's going with it, so I might even miss something as well. So it's definitely good to hire outside.
Yeah, and also it's just like I'm too close to it. I've already read it 20 times. So if there's a sentence where I left a word out, my brain automatically fills that word in for the last 20 times I've read it. So I can't even see the flaws sometimes.
Yeah. I asked one of our editors, he's like new to editing, so we tried to get some credits for editing. And friend Hector Barrero, he's the artist for our like flagship comic. And I actually asked him yesterday. I'm not really sure about the whole plot line for the issue 5 of Seer Chronicles, but I need you to look at it because I don't. And he didn't read the 4th one yet, but it was just really weird because it just seems like it's the same thing happening over and over again. And before I wrote that, I wrote 3 other stories, 3 other comics in the same week. And he's like, "Wow, you keep doing a bunch of stuff." And I'm like, yeah. So I think my brain just did a huge brain fart, and I just wrote the same thing over and over again. So can you just go through it? And he's like, yeah. So
no, that happens. It absolutely happens. And but as far as also what makes me decide to either put it in a short story or to write it as a comic book, it kind of depends on what opportunities I have. I recently wrote a story called The CG Rendered Man, because a friend offered me a chance to submit to a magazine if I had a sci-fi horror story. So I had this story concept laying around that was just a paragraph sort of elevator pitch. And then I was going to turn it into a comic book story, but I could write this as a 5-page short story. That'll work as well. So now I have a short story version of that. I didn't make it into that particular magazine, but it'll go into my next collection. But yeah, so I think it comes down to timing of what opportunities are presenting themselves or what projects are taking submissions at the moment.
You just mentioned that you wrote, you had a paragraph summary of a story. Do you start most of your kind of brain dumps like that, where you got an idea and you kind of just write out a quick paragraph to summarize the idea of what you're working on?
Yeah, I do that a lot. For example, the last 2 nights I've been working on a story called Bluetooth, which is going to first tell the story of Harold Bluetooth, the Viking King, and then his death, and then his perspective from afterlife, and then finding 1,000 years later that he is the essence of our Bluetooth technology, and trying to escape that fate and sort of communicate to the people and to free him from that imprisonment. So I have that notes of that on a paper jotted down. And then I'll go into my computer and sort of organize it a little better. And then it might sit there for a few months until I'm inspired to write more on it. Or I'm thinking of buying a biography about Harold Bluetooth to maybe inspire it a little deeper. But yeah, so definitely jot things down and come back to them when I either have the inspiration or the time, or maybe the pressure, because I know, somebody wanted a mythology story in this anthology. So let me write a pitch about that now.
Speaking of that, then, when you write all of these, do you organize them a certain way, or do you tag them a certain way? So this is, what is it? Nordic mythology. This is, do you tag things so that if you have an opportunity like an anthology, you can go, okay, do I have anything in, the horror sci-fi,
Not necessarily. I sort of do it more by season, or year, story ideas from 2021 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then some are specifically for my flagship book on my comic book brand. My flagship book is Sidereal Apogee, and it is cyberpunk stories. The actually targeted adverts takes place in that shared continuity.
I figured that the what's the name of the prisons?
Soul Core, I think, is the overarching like organization that controls the whole solar system in that continuity. And so it's like a dystopian sort of world where everything is controlled by corporations. The Earth is a desolate, infested, radiated mess. But like there are huge populations on the moon, on Mars, and to a lesser degree in the outer moons of the gas giants and in the asteroid belt. So it's sort of a similar setting to like The Expanse and those books, but definitely very, very different. But similar in scope and like that. Yeah, it's a solar system wide sort of.
Is that what the Soul stands for in Soul Corp? Like something like standing for like the solar system?
Yeah, that they oversee the whole solar system. Yes,
that's very cool. Yeah, I didn't quite get that. I got that it was in the future, but I know it's only mentioned briefly, so I figured there was more context to it based on the intro. But yeah, no, I thought that was pretty interesting. So yeah, so if you're writing out tons of these little paragraphs of story ideas, how many do you think you probably do in like a year's time? Like if you're just like writing out random brain ideas.
I would say I generate more ideas than complete stories in a year. And that like that CG rendered man, which I wrote in the course of a week, like last February, I think, had been sitting in my to-do list for at least 3 years, like as an idea. And then so yeah, pull it out when it's useful. And like so the next collection is going to feature another series of short stories, but it also has a couple of stories that are focused on these two particular demons. And that I've had those stories sitting there. One of them is like half written, another one is just a paragraph form, but they're at least like 16 or 17 years old, these ideas. But I've also like come back to them every few years and written down another note about it, like, oh wait, this should happen too. Even though I'm not actively like working very hard on it, it's like a little piece of the story that I've wanted to write for a long time will drop into my head at a random moment.
That's very cool. Is there any short story, like you just mentioned one of them you're sitting on for years, is there any short story like you kind of started, or even if you didn't know it was going to be a short story or a potential comic, like any story or idea you started that you keep coming back to but still has not seen the light? Like you've come back to it a ton of times, but it just hasn't gotten released?
So it's going to be 3 stories about those two demons. The one is called Dead in San Francisco, and it's about a guy who dies at a Grateful Dead show, and then sort of, and he's not even a fan. He gets dragged to the show and then dies there. So it's a whole bit of irony there. And then he makes friends with the ghost of Jimi Hendrix, and who like guides him through the afterlife in San Francisco to a bit. And so those two demons will then cross paths with them as they're doing what they're doing. And then there's another one called a deceptively named Apocalypse Story, which is where these two demons finally find Lucifer, the devil, who's been missing since the time of Christ, apparently. But the devil is sort of retired from evil and magic, and he's just a chef in southern France. And for centuries, he's just been cooking food. That's his new passion. And so they kind of try to talk him back into like, no, let's cause the apocalypse. We finally found you. And he's like, no, I'm not really feeling it. And so awesome. That's kind of the summary of that one. And then the third story that they'll be involved in is about them as a rap group, that they sort of take over these human bodies and then their misadventures as like two demons as underground rap artists. And so that will be like the book ends 3 little pillars to hold up the next collection. And yeah, so at least 2 of those stories are like 20 years old that I haven't completed them, but have added notes to them over the years.
That's pretty intense. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Nice. I'm trying to think if because Greg, like the first stories that like the stories that we're releasing now, what was that 2015? When did you start writing those?
2014.
So it's like, yeah, like we definitely understand what it's like holding on to those stories. Even if you know how they're going to end, like getting them finished is definitely a time-consuming task. Like it's you really have to like just kind of keep going through it. But with even this one anthology, I could see you got like tons of ideas you know, we got 20 years worth of ideas. I can't even imagine we're struggling with, 5, 6 years, 7 years.
Well, the thing with comic books too, and what slows us down is like we can only work as fast as our artists can work, and we can only afford our artists as quickly as we work to pay those bills. So, yeah, comic books, especially independent comic books, it's a labor of love and a slow sort of process. That I think of all the books that we intended to put out last year, I only got 1 of 5 done. But like this collection is now going out, and then we have like 4 more comic books that should have got done last year that'll come out in quick succession over the next few months in 2023. So yeah, it's we don't work by as tight a deadline as Marvel or DC, I'm sure, but it's fun to finally see the final product when we do get it.
Yeah. I was actually talking to Hector last Monday. Yep. So he was supposed to meet me on a call on Sunday night, but that didn't happen because he fell asleep. So
as one does.
Well, I work overnight, but he would still normally be up, but I guess he took a nap or something. Anyway, so we were editing a comic that we're gonna put out, I don't know, in a couple of years. And he was talking about the Seer Chronicles, which is the flagship comic that he's doing the art for, and he noticed that there's so many different transitions that it might confuse people because there's so many stories in one issue. And that was kind of like the point, but there's way too many in the third one. So he's like, instead of like adding all of these, you could just like make it its own comic or like make it a short story. And then I was like, oh, that's a good idea. So I took this one character that's like became a fan favorite to us personally. It's based off of a person that I know in real life, and I despise that person. But his story isn't really in the third one. It's like for 3 pages. So I took that, and then most of issue 4 of that series is basically about him. There's 19 pages of just his story. So I took all of his story and I just made it its own thing. It's like a one shot. And then I took things that happened to the cops and like just the other citizens of the city. That's going to be a short story thing. So his idea made us have way more content than I thought we were going to have. So.
Yeah. And I mean, every unique idea, like, it's something, a new content to add for your fandom. So yeah, whether it comes out in short story form or comic book form, somebody out there is going to digest it if they like the stories or the continuity, the title.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to ask too, when it comes to your short stories, do you ever have like concept art drawn up for any of them? Like just random, like little one piece, designs?
Not very often for short stories. I think that's something I depend on myself to be descriptive, to be as detailed as I can with describing how something looks physically.
That's kind of why I asked too. Like the description is phenomenal. Like I can picture what's happening. That's why I was curious if you ever did have any of them like drawn out. Because
not specifically for short stories, but what I'm blessed by is the fact that so many of my short story characters come from this universe that we do as a comic book. So it's like, we do have the art, but it wasn't drawn for the short stories. It was drawn in preparation for the comic books, where the comic book art itself can inspire some of the stuff that appears in the short stories.
That's awesome, because like that's the reason I was thinking that was just for like stuff for ourselves as well. Like Greg's written some short stories, and I find it interesting that I always try to look at old comic books and new comic books and see like what was done in them, like at the physical prints specifically. Like something interesting was that a lot of comics would be separated by an ad in the middle, and it kind of was almost like a commercial break in the middle of your Saturday morning cartoons. And then sometimes at the end they'd have like what's it called, concept art, just random art as a collection depending on the comic. And I was thinking about that with the short story collection like this. If you had like concept art, even just the pencils, it'd be such a cool little thing. Like if you were to buy this as a physical book, You get the front, the art, the cover art, obviously. You get your short stories, and then like just a collection of art that, whether or not it's directly involved or just tangentially inspired art from this, because I know that if one thing that would be really cool if you had a bunch of fan art, right? That would be really awesome. People read this, they make their own art, but like to almost inspire that would be to show some of the concept art, and maybe even like, hey, submit some of your art and I'll put it in my next anthology. I don't know why, I just thought that was an interesting idea.
I think I'll be doing cross promotional stuff like that at conventions when I get a chance to table, where I will be like, yeah, here's this book, but also these characters appear in these comic books. So like, I can like point out certain stories that are about whatever character, and then show them issues that feature the same character.
Yeah, that's very cool. I like that because like it's one of those things where I'm even like right now I'm like, where is it? I put it someplace. I'm going through like a book right now, a nonfiction, but it's all about building like super fans, like people that love everything that you do. They want to buy everything, and one of the things that he mentions in there, and I see it in myself as a fan of other works, is that the more tiny little pieces that exist, even if they're not all in one book, like I have to go, in fact, especially when they're not in one book and I have to go find them, makes for like this exciting like world building in my own head for whatever creator I might be following. And I think that's why people like make fun of like how DC tried to launch their MCU and then how Marvel actually launched theirs. Throughout the whole series, it's like one little story here and there, but like there's these little nuggets in the background that are sometimes part of like this huge main overarching story, and then sometimes they're not. They're just this little nugget, just for you, just the person who looked a little deeper than everybody else. And I don't know, I just find that really enjoyable. So I'm always constantly looking for that. And like the fact that a huge chunk of your short stories are connected to major comics that you're creating. I love that idea of like letting people know, like only like you said, you're going to be at a convention, like be like, oh yeah, by the way, this person's in this story, like being that fan again, where it's like, trying to put myself in that shoes. Like I love trying to point out like, oh, I don't know if you knew this, but like these guys are the same people and these are over here. And it's like, yeah, I love the Easter eggs, the connected threads. It's enjoyable.
Oh yeah, I'm all about the Easter eggs. There are a couple of things that my editor tried to edit out of some of my stories. I was like, oh no, that's an Easter egg. Like, there's in the story, serial killer. The girl in the beginning is wearing a T-shirt of a kid in a pig pen, and it says "The Family Jams," and that's like a Charles Manson Easter egg. That was the name of his album or whatever, and that was their album cover. So like in a story about murder, like putting a serial killer Easter egg on a T-shirt, definitely. I'm saving one right now at the moment that I saved from Westworld. I was a big fan of Westworld, and I saved the serial code that appears on Maeve's golf ball, I think they call them. So I'm saving that serial number to like insert somewhere like that. A super fan of Westworld would be like, wait, that's Maeve, and like that. Otherwise, it'll just appear as some serial number randomly in some sci-fi story. But yeah, no, I'm all about shit like that for sure.
Yeah, see, I love that. There's a comic book company that's like much newer. It started a few years ago, called IT Comics. It's built by so there's a company called like Quest Nutrition that makes the Quest bars. One of the founders, his name is Tom Bilyeu, and he started this comic book company called IT Comics, where it's actually cyberpunk stuff. Like you probably enjoy it a lot, but basically one of the things that they did was right in the beginning of the comic. There's like this cool design of like these twin dragons, like like circling, and there's just a bunch of zeros and ones. And I'm like, no one just puts a bunch of zeros and ones there. I bet it means something. And so I translated it, and it said hope. And immediately, like I'm all excited because I'm already a fan of like the creators. That's why I was getting the book to begin with. So I reached out and like messaged them on Instagram. I'm like, hey, I figured out this means hope in the beginning, and they messaged me, and I was like the first person because I picked up their comic like at the release in New York Comic Con, and like I love like again, like that feeling I had, I love being able to give that to other people where they can have that thing, like you just said, like that's awesome to save the serial number. So that one person who looks it up, like that's all that matters. Like, I love that. Just it's like I'm just gonna put this right here in front of you, and if you notice, you notice.
Super nerdery. Yes, absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah, there's in Ink 2, which is a solo series that we're coming out with this year. There's actually like a language that we completely came up with, and
Okay.
it can be like a whole decoder and cipher thing that like people can figure out if they want to, but there's gonna be a message on the wall, and they're like, oh, so like if you want to figure it out, you're gonna be able to.
Yeah.
I'm reading Borges Ficciones at the moment. He's an Argentinian writer. Magic realism is the genre, sort of postmodern stuff. And the first two stories are stories about him talking about books, describing other books. And like the first story was about that he finds encyclopedias that tell stories about countries that never existed with maps of them that like they don't exist on this planet. And then like another encyclopedia that they found was from an entirely different planet, but someone on our planet had written it and published 30 volumes, like a 30 encyclopedia set describing the actions of this other planet. And that like he theorizes that it was a conspiracy of people in the 1600s that came together to like invent the idea of this world. But either way, he has this mysterious book, and it's completely fictional, but it's just such an interesting way to like tell stories. It's like I found these weird tomes and like then describing what's in them.
I just realized that made me think of. Do you know the movie The Princess Bride?
Yeah.
So the book that's based off of, if you read the book, it actually talks about in the beginning of the book that there's a bigger book, like a really well written book, but it's got a lot of too much story in it. So we decided to take that story and like cut out all the fluff and just tell the best parts of the story. But the funny thing is that original story never was written; it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I love that because even in the movie, when the grandfather is like reading the book to the grandson, like the book that he's reading, he's skimming past stuff. So he's like,
Okay.
it's like the book that he's reading is the original book, but the original book never existed, just the great story of the Princess Bride. And I just like, yeah, that's such a clever way to do things, like to create this entirely fictional world as the premise of your world, like with intent. Like it's such a because I think that's probably the first time I ever saw it or like knew about that was The Princess Bride. Like having your fictional world based off of a fictional truth, like that never didn't exist.
Kind of like Lovecraft with the Necronomicon. That we now actually have like fictional versions of the Necronomicon, but while Lovecraft was writing, it was only just mentioned in his stories. And then later horror writers tried to create what it might contain.
No, yeah, that's all, and that's the other thing too. It's like, yeah, if it inspires somebody else to create something based off of that, like that's such a cool. Like someone could create those encyclopedias, for example. Like that's a very cool idea, and it also sets you up. Like depending on how much you want to create of your world, like eventually that gives you something you could create. You could create those encyclopedias. Like that's something that we're doing with our world building. Is we have an entire we have three-dimensional versions of our cities that our characters take place in, like our stories take place in. So like
in a program in a computer, like
yeah. And so like we have 3D models of our cities, and for some of the key buildings that we're involved with, I've even done the 3D modeling of the building. So like we have a diner and we built it all out. And last year I got a 3D printer from one of my cousins, and I spent probably like a few days trying to build it to find out there's missing pieces. I went and got some pieces. I got further along the building, found another missing piece. And so by the end of last year, I finally finished building it. So I now have the 3D printer. I've ordered the filament that's coming in. And one of the things I'd eventually love to do is be able to print out little 3D models of like, maybe it's like a basic version of our city or like one of the, like just the diner, right? Things like that. And it's just like, it's so cool to, like, there's so much stuff you can do to build out a world. And it's awesome because it can be as basic, and when I say basic, it doesn't mean that it's not really well developed, like these short stories. Like there's no art to it, and yet like there's so much detail you can envision it. So you can go from that all the way to like a fully developed universe and world with like encyclopedias, and like that's such a cool idea. I love doing both the setup for the fact that those things can exist and even building those things. So like I love that idea.
Awesome. Yeah, those diners might be good merch. Your fans might want to buy versions of the diner.
Yeah, I got was it? I only got red filament because all the other filaments I kept asking for were taken. So it's funny because the diner ends up pretty red, but that's not the intention. So I might hold off on printing the diner, but yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Like it'd be so cool to have like a prototype of our diner design, because the whole reason we did it was that for our universe we wanted to keep like extreme consistency. So we wanted to make sure like this diner as is at this intersection in this city. So if he runs out of the diner, what's across the street? Because our artist has to draw that, right? It's going to show a backward view or a forward view, like what's in front of behind them. So our artist can draw a detailed background. And I think the main reason for that was it was like anime inspired. So like I looked at old anime, like Cowboy Bebop, for example, and I was trying to figure out like the artwork doesn't look as clean as newer anime. Like, what is it that makes this such good artwork? And it's this hyper detailed background that you never go to. Like, there's certain scenes in Cowboy Bebop where they're flying past a city that you never end up going to, and it's like so well drawn out. And I'm just like mind blown by that. So like that's part of what like inspired the idea of like having these really well built out cities in the background. So like it's always there.
Was Bebop the one that they did for fun, like on a break between other major projects, or was that Fully Cooley? I know one of those animes back then that I really loved was sort of done on a whim and not like on a big budget. Like,
I wonder, that would be interesting if they did, because the one thing about Cowboy Bebop was that it's one of like the only animes that it probably is actually the only anime that had one full complete story arc and then it's done. Right. So like it could be that they were given a short budget and they're like, let's just write one hell of a story and give it a great ending. Like, like it's so that would be really interesting. I'm gonna have to look it up. My brother's a big Cowboy Bebop fan too, so like that's
and the best original soundtrack for an anime. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah, it's phenomenal. Yeah. So like, yeah. So like, I do love that. Like the idea, because that's what I mean. Like every form of medium, animations, real life comics, short stories, they all have these worlds behind them that can be built out. And like, like I said, I love that your short stories connect with your comic world, because it just gives you more places. Like, oh, I want to learn more. Oh, there is more. Like, like I love that.
Yeah, some of the cities even show up in different stories. Or the Roche Limit is a club in the one story Roche Limit. That appears in the comic book. It appears in the book. And I think it appears more than once in the comic book. Yeah, it does. Cowboy Bebop was definitely a big inspiration for Sidereal Apogee. Same sort of setting of like solar system wide, and like these rogue characters, bounty hunters, smugglers, mercenaries. So I'd say that Sidereal Apogee isn't as funny as Cowboy Bebop, but it's a similar like scale of humanity a few hundred years in the future, draped across several planets.
So speaking of that being an inspiration, what's one of the best world build outs or like Easter egg surprises of anything, like whether it's like the MCU or anime or comic books or written novels? Like what's been one of your favorite, like you mentioned the encyclopedias, but what's been one of your favorite like hooks into a world that made you like really want to learn more about it?
I don't know if I have a really good answer for that right now.
That was kind of a tough one. Like, yeah.
I did recently watch a cartoon show called Pantheon, which is kind of like a cyberpunk story. And I did find Pantheon to be like something that once I saw the first 5 minutes, I was like, ooh, this is good. And I definitely was there for the whole ride. I think there's a season 2 coming. was based on a short story, and that's the first of like 3 short stories in that collection, maybe. But yeah.
Looks like the same artwork as Ben 10.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh.
So I don't know. I like Star Wars. I'm a big Star Wars fan, but also of the new shows, like some of them I really don't like. Like I do not like The Mandalorian. I liked Boba Fett until it became Mandalorian season 3. Like I love Bad Batch. I'm watching Bad Batch right now. I thought Obi-Wan Kenobi was pretty much garbage. Although I did like Young Leia. Young Leia was pretty cool. But I just, as a writer and an editor, it gets some of these stories that they put out in episodic, as a single episode, just like huge holes in them that like it would have never gotten past my desk. That I would have been like, wait, so Mando crashes on this icy world or whatever because the ship doesn't work. Then he runs around and fights beasts in the icy satellite, and then once he gets back to a ship, the ship suddenly works. Like, then why did we crash there in the first place? Like, your episode is garbage. Or the episode where Darth Vader is tracking down Obi-Wan, and he's like using force power to throw people aside, and he's like, he knows exactly where Obi-Wan is, and he's walking right up to Obi-Wan. They have their little lightsaber battle. Then suddenly there's a 30-foot square fire, and Darth Vader just can't walk through fire, and Obi-Wan gets away. Like, Jesus fucking Christ, he's Darth Vader. He could like force fly over that fire and continue the battle. But you're like, well, let's just wrap up the episode here. Obi-Wan somehow gets off planet, and Darth Vader is stymied by a fire. Like, that's shitty writing. That is. Yeah. Darth Vader could have easily overcome that fire.
It's interesting too.
So I don't know. So
that's something where
I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for.
No, yeah, that's okay. But yeah, that's something where it's interesting that, like, I can actually see where they might have been going with that, where they might have been trying to show like, oh, it's the same, it's that old thing that happened where they were fighting in flames, and it's like a flashback in his mind, like it could be more of a PTSD response. But like, if they don't, like, you kind of need to make that a little more evident. It's been a long time since those movies. It's not like, that's what's going to be in the top of your mind. So it's interesting when like you said, like you it wouldn't get past your desk, and yet it gets past these like huge $1 billion budget desks. And it's so strange that like I can understand why someone would start that, but then like they don't finish the thought, and then it still makes it onto the film, and it's like, or the show, and you're just like, they do that a lot. Like the old movies were set up so well to like pull you in and then make a turn, right? And then the prequel trilogy, they kind of did that. They missed some spots. There were some spots that were, really good for the lore, and other spots where you're like, okay, you're just kind of bending stuff. And then like the new 3, like it's very similar to the shows where they're like, let's just open a bunch of plot holes and forget about them. I hope somebody doesn't.
Yeah, and suddenly Princess Leia can fly into outer space because of the Force.
Yeah, we won't get into that because we've probably had 4 of our podcast episodes tangent down the rabbit hole of the new 3 movies and the plot holes, the broken lore, the hyperspace travel to blow up ships, breaking all physics of the universe. But yeah, we won't go into that because we've done too many episodes talking about that. But yes, I 100% agree that yes, Star Wars, the original 3, excellent storytelling.
You started breaking up on my.
Oh.
I did love Andor. Andor was incredible.
Andor.
Yeah, I didn't watch that yet.
I didn't watch
Andor. Was great. Oh, it's so good. It's the best of any of the new stuff. Yeah.
Check it out.
Really good. But yeah, I enjoy Bad Batch. I really like the Clone Wars. I'm a big Ahsoka Tano fan, so I'm looking forward to that.
No, that's cool. Yeah, the Clone Wars are fun. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. So we covered a lot today. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Once the internet works.
Yeah, Yeah, I can hear. It's funny. I can hear us like cutting out a little bit. So
Yeah,
if people want to follow your work, where should they go?
okay, first of all, our comic books right now are available on indieplanet.com/123go. You can find me on Instagram at Phoebe123go. I don't really post a lot on Instagram, but there will be points in the future where certain of our Kickstarters or book launches will be posted there. I on Facebook, you can find us at 123go Publications. We have like a fan page there. And I actually have been working with Wix on putting 123gopublications.com up. I own the domain, and I'm just kind of I actually got really confused by Wix. It was supposed to be super user friendly, but maybe that's if you already know how to program websites, which I don't. So I think I'm going to be paying someone to do my Wix, but that's in motion, and we will have some free books available there. If you go to the indieplanet.com/123go, you can download 13th Moon Volume 1, Trouble Number 1, and Gunmetal Black Ops Number 2 for free. Those are free digital downloads up there right now. And also the story targeted adverts, which show features in the Superliminal Latency collection, can be listened to as an audio story. Dust Horizons is a podcast, and just look up Dust Horizons targeted adverts if you want to listen to it. I think it's like 5 to 7 minutes. It's the second of 2 stories from a Halloween episode a few years ago. The book itself will be available on Kindle, hopefully within a day or 2. I just got the appropriate version from my editor to post to Kindle. And also the book will be available on indieplanet.com/123go /123go shortly. I'm actually just waiting to receive in the mail my author's copy to make sure the margins and the printing all looks right before I offer to sell it to other people.
That's cool. Cool.
Awesome. Well, it was great having you on here. I definitely enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too. Yeah, look forward to checking out more of these short stories and seeing your future work.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.